So, good evening to you all, one and all. Fáilte. Today, as you know, is the day where Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and the Greens have finally produced their programme for government. And we know that there's been much discussion and there are many, many questions now as to what all of this means and what happens next. And that's why we're joining you live this evening on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, to have that conversation with you and to answer at least some of your questions. And I'm joined by Broin, our spokesperson on housing, and Pearse Doherty, who's our deputy leader in the Dáil, and as you all know, also our finance spokesperson. So what we want to do this evening is to take some of your questions and maybe just to set out for all of us what this moment in Irish political life means, what's the direction for our next steps, and critically, what it means in terms of the core issues that we campaigned on in the election. You remember the issue of housing, the issue of a properly resourced public health system, the issue around the age of pension entitlement. So we're going to get to as much of that as we can this evening. But before we do, I want to say this. From the day of the election, as the votes were being counted, I, as leader of Sinn Féin, started a whole series of contacts with party leaders right across the board. And we had, over the weeks and months, many, many very, very useful discussions with many people across Irish political life. In fact, we spoke to every political party and the independents that would speak to us. Pearse Doherty was our lead negotiator. Eoin and myself, naturally, were deeply involved in this work too. I want you to know that we understand that we got a mandate for government and we want Sinn Féin in government, and we worked hard and we will continue to work hard to ensure that Sinn Féin leads a government for change. But the truth is, my friends, that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, the old two, clubbed together just as they said they would in the course of the election campaign. And their sole purpose has been to keep Sinn Féin out and to frustrate change. That's the long and the short of it. For now, it seems that they may have succeeded. And Catherine, you've been in touch with us, and your question is that you're disillusioned with the news. You ask, how can the establishment totally disregard the will of the people? And you say that we desperately need change. We absolutely agree with that. The change that we discussed in the course of the election campaign, those needs haven't gone away. Needs around housing and access to healthcare and all of the things that we need to live a decent life. I mean, arguably, those are more immediate now than even they were back in February. We still desperately need that change. As for the political establishment, well, you can see what they've done. They have decided not simply to keep Sinn Féin out, but they have decided to batten down the hatches, to circle the wagons, to protect the status quo, and to ensure, in as much as they can, that really nothing changes. But they're not going to win that battle because the appetite for change is still very, very real. Sabrina chips in to say, that it's finally clear for all to see that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are one and the same, and there's no pretense anymore. Sinn Féin is the opposition, our hope for real change, and our government in waiting come the next election. I mean, that certainly, Sabrina, is how we see things. And I'd be lying. I think Pearse and Eoin will agree with me. We're not going to pretend that we're not disappointed at the fact to have moved to block us from government. That is very disappointing. I'm disappointed. I'm angry about it too, if I'm really honest about it. But that is what they've done. But we can't allow that to throw us off course. And it is our job. If we're not in government, then we lead the opposition. And it is our job. And I said earlier today that we will provide the most effective political opposition that this state has ever seen. And I know, Pearse, you and I have, and Eoin have talked about this, and we're absolutely determined that the things that people need have to be delivered. We're not going to have another 4 or 5 years like the 4 and 5 years that we had under the last Fianna Fáil Fine Gael administration.
Yeah, and I think that's, Mary Lou, it's an important point, and people need to realise that as well, that if that is the way it will end up, if Sinn Féin is leading the opposition in this most strengthened position that we've been in over 100 years, that the change that people voted for hasn't stopped, that it is unstoppable, while Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael will try and frustrate that, will try and push back against that. The issues that we campaigned for in the election are as much needed, maybe more so now than ever before. So therefore, we will be preparing to effect that change from that side of the House, if that is exactly where we end up. So I think people should be reassured that we will use the increased mandate, the huge talent that we now have within our ranks. It's absolutely fantastic to see all the new colleagues and joining us with all the different abilities that they bring with that, and the enhanced Shanna team as well. So I think we're in a strong position to enhance that change, but we need to ensure that people will stay with us, because change isn't just affected inside Leinster House. It is what is happening out on the ground. It is because of the votes. It is because of people movements. It is because of people voicing their opinions. It's about people not accepting the status quo. And while they have clubbed together to frustrate change, to try and prevent change, our message is that change will happen, and we will ensure that it happens.
Absolutely. And Marcus here in Dublin is in on this point again. He says, and how are you, Marcus? Good evening to you. With the deal agreed, glad to see that Ireland will finally have an effective opposition for the first time in decades, even though he says that the bizarre bit is that the biggest party on the island is now the party of opposition. So, Marcus, you're asking, what are we going to do in the immediate term with this position? How will we differentiate ourselves as a party? How will we work to increase our support base? Those are really, really, really good questions, because Marcus, you're on the right track. This is, of course, about what we do inside the Dáil. Of course it is, and giving leadership there. But the kind of change that we need to bring about is a job for everyone. And it's about much more than just in the House. It's about out on the streets, isn't it, Eoin?
It is, absolutely. And I've been talking to housing rights campaigners and activists and trade unions and others today. And of course, many of them share the kind of disappointment that certainly we have, having put so much work in to trying to form that government for change in recent weeks, but also that wider sense of disappointment that I think people across the state will have. And I think it's going to take a day or two before people have a chance to read and digest the programme for government. Interestingly, it's one of the longest programmes for governments that has ever been published. And yet for a document with so many words, it has so few real hard and fast commitments. Lots of vague promises, lots of talks of reviews and considerations and whatnot. What it doesn't have is a coherent plan, whether it's on housing or health or so many other key areas like childcare, for example, that people rightly came out and voted for in February. What this document doesn't have is clear commitments, timelines and funding allocations to ensure that the services that people so desperately need will be delivered. And of course, we know Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael for years have failed to deliver on those key issues. And that's why, of course, they can't be trusted to deliver on those issues in the coming period, which is all the more reason why, whether you're a TD, a senator, a councillor, or an activist on the ground, we need to be vigilant, we need to be focused and keep campaigning for that change that people don't just deserve, but they so desperately need in their day-to-day lives.
Absolutely. Eoin, and Ray is in now saying Fianna Fáil have absolutely no interest in serving the will of the people, but rather this is all about facilitating Micheál Martin and his personal crusade to become Taoiseach. Well, certainly that has been a talking point since the election. And don't get us wrong. We want a Sinn Féin Taoiseach. Dare I say, we might want the first woman Taoiseach to be in position. But this isn't about jobs for the boys or the girls. This can't just be about people's career plans. We're in the middle of like very, very challenging times, but also very, very exciting times where we can make big things happen. So, I mean, if Fianna Fáil want to simply wrap themselves up in the ambitions of any individual, that's their business. It's certainly not what we'll be at in Sinn Féin. Sharon, I have to put on my glasses. Please excuse me. It is. Yes, it is Sharon. I wasn't sure, Sharon, if you were Sharon or Shannon, but you're Sharon and you're welcome and you're from Clare. And you're asking about why it appears to you so little was done to form a government. Who was approached? Who refused? People don't want Sinn Féin in opposition. They voted for change, and it appears that not enough was done to achieve this. Well, Sharon, can I just tell you, as I said at the start of this broadcast, I want to absolutely reassure you that consistently up until the very bitter end, we have kept in touch with everybody. So you're asking who? The Greens, the Soc Dems, people before profit, the wider independent left.
The Labour Party
Labour
were involved
Party.
in that as well. And I would have done a lot of these talks right throughout this process. And I can say to you, of all there's I think 10 groupings in the Dáil between parties and groupings of independent, and every single one of them we engage with them on a regular, and indeed with a number of these groupings we had substantive pieces of work done with them in relation to common principles. Not one of the groupings actually ruled out Sinn Féin from being in government, including the Labour Party, who made a decision, and it was their own decision to make, that they weren't going to go into government, but they did engage in talks with us in relation to, because they kept it open about potentially facilitating a government from the opposition benches. The reality is, as Mary points out, there was only two parties that are practicing the politics of exclusion, wanting to hold on to power, wanting to frustrate change, wanting to delay change, and that was Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. So I can tell you from our point of view, and we were meeting, on a daily basis right up until the recent period, trying to make sure that the mandate that we got was represented, and nobody more than me or the team that we had wanted to be in that position where we could influence the decisions of the government by being the next government and actually delivering on housing, delivering on health, delivering on childcare, and that huge vision that Sinn Féin has for transforming our society.
And can I also just tell you, Sharon, if it's the thing, if it is the thing that things don't go just as smoothly as the Green Party leadership or the Fianna Fáil Party leadership might hope for, I just want you to be clear that we talk to people. I mean, that's what we do, and we want to be in government. We are available to talk to everybody, as we said all along. We want the government to change, so we're still ready, willing and able. That hasn't been the problem. The problem has been that the old two of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael decided definitively, before they agreed on anything else, that they were keeping Sinn Féin out because they don't want the change. That's the truth. They want to hang on to power and they want to protect the status quo. Aidan is with us, and Aidan's asking about housing. He says there's a lot of promises he thinks in this deal, but he says he's no faith that anything will change. And he's asking Eoin directly about yourself. He wants to know, what's your take on the deal?
Well, Aidan, thanks very much for the question. And I've gone through the draft programme for government now a number of times today. What's striking about it is how little actual commitments are there. So, for example, affordable housing, one of the single biggest issues in the election. Huge numbers of working people out there, some of whom are actually earning quite good money, and they simply can't afford to rent or to buy at affordable prices. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael in confidence and something for 4 years to come up with an affordable housing scheme. In fact, Fine Gael have been promising for 6 years, halfway through the last government. And incredibly, in this draft programme, there are no targets for affordable rental or affordable purchase accommodation. There's also no definitions of what the government means by affordable and what kind of prices. And this has been one of the big problems over the last number of years, as Eoin Murphy kept saying that, for example, €320,000 was an affordable home, or rents in Dublin at 12 or 1,300 euros a bed would be affordable. And of course, that's simply not the case. So certainly from the point of view of affordable housing, there is nothing clear in terms of what the government is intending to do. Likewise, on social housing, Fine Gael had committed to 50,000 new social homes, 10,000 a year over the next 5 years. That's something that had already been agreed before the general election. In fact, Fine Gael went one step further and promised to deliver 60,000 social homes over the next 5 years. And yet again, incredibly, that's been drawn back to 50,000. And in fact, many of those aren't real social homes, the private sector homes leased under the long-term leasing scheme. There was much speculation in the media that there would be a referendum on a right to housing, something that housing rights campaigners and Sinn Féin and others have been campaigning for years. And very oddly, when you actually read the draft programme, there is no commitment for a referendum on the right to housing being enshrined in the Constitution, but on housing being enshrined in the Constitution. And I don't think that the absence of the word right is accidental there. One of our big concerns, Mary Lou, of course, was this thing called the Land Development Agency.
Right.
This Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael's kind of super quango to allow public land to be used to deliver not just social and affordable housing in small numbers, but unaffordable open market price housing, a little bit like the O'Devany Gardens deal on steroids. And again, if you read through the text, very confusing, very contradictory, no clarity on any of that. And maybe just lastly, Mary Lou, on homelessness, because it's such a big issue. While there's some vague promises to do more on tackling homelessness, again, there's no clear commitments to increase, for example, the provision of housing first tenancies for single homeless people, nor is there any timeline for which to end long-term homelessness or the need to sleep rough. So I have to say, having read all of this, this is really the continuation of the failed Rebuilding Ireland plan. It looks like Fianna Fáil have pretty much capitulated to Fine Gael's requirements. And while the Greens may say that they've got some new language, you'd be a very, very naive politician to think you could trust Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael to deliver on those promises.
For sure. I mean, certainly on my own read of it, Eoin, I was just very struck by the fact that it seems to me that they're trying to make the O'Devany Gardens model, and people will know what happened there. It's a huge, incredibly valuable site in the middle of Dublin City, in my own constituency, only a stone's throw from me, as it happens. Public land with minimal, nominal levels of real public housing, not affordable. I mean, I don't know what planet people are on. They don't seem to have in government any real understanding of affordability, but the real scandal of using public land really for private gain and for homes and houses that no ordinary working person or any young person could ever hope really to afford. And it struck me, Eoin, looking at the plan, that actually that's the direction of traffic, and that is extremely, extremely worrying. Eoin, she's a renter. Hello, Sinead. She's the mammy of three. They're under a lot of pressure. Is there enough in the deal to help renters? And if not, what would we do differently? I think we can safely say there's only a reference to renters. I don't think there's anything substantive. And then the second bit, Eoin, is Lisa, and she's asking about the eviction ban and the need to extend that. And Lisa, hello, Lisa, makes the point that everyone now is going to need to be given a decent amount of time and a chance just to get back on their feet.
Yeah, and again, thanks to Lisa and to Sinead for the questions. And pretty much as with Rebuilding Ireland, the section of the draft programme for government on renters is really one of the weakest. So while there is an indication that they're going to extend the current ban on rent increases, notice to quit and evictions, although they're not saying for how long, there's no more certainty beyond that. We're expecting Eoin Murphy maybe later this week to extend it for 3 months, but those bans need to extend to the very end of the year at the earliest, and possibly after that. There's also obviously a big concern about the growing level of rent arrears debt that renters are building up, even those renters that have managed to get the emergency rent supplement payment. And again, while the draft programme says that the government is going to look at some research they've commissioned from the Economic and Social Research Institute before deciding what to do, they're not sending out a clear signal that renters won't be left on their own to deal with what could be a very substantial rent debt burden. There are some vague commitments. These are things that we've heard before from the government, that they're going to look at a deposit protection scheme and possibly tenancies of indefinite duration. But some of that has actually been contradicted by Fine Gael briefings to the media over the weekend to say that, for example, they're not going to look at removing some of the opt-out clauses for landlords in existing legislation. Of course, we've remained committed to the largest public house building programme in the history of the state. Over 100,000 public homes on public land is what we would do. And in fact, in post-COVID-19, with the need to get more people back to work, we may even exceed that if we were in government. And that's not just social homes for people on the council waiting list. It's affordable rental homes for young professionals and affordable purchase homes for working families. And we've been very clear from the start. Only 2 weeks ago, I launched a detailed affordable housing scheme that would see good quality, well-built homes, apartments and houses in Dublin, for example, for purchase at prices below €230,000, and outside of Dublin and the commuter belt, even lower than that again. And likewise with affordable rental, we've devised a scheme that would allow local authorities, approved housing bodies and community housing trusts to deliver affordable rental 2-bedroom homes and apartments, €700 to €900 a month in Dublin, again, cheaper outside. So there's no doubt that these can be done, but they can only be done by delivering public housing on public land, led by local authorities, approved housing bodies and others. Once you let the private developers in, as for example, they're currently talking about in conjunction with the Land Development Agency in Dundee Down, or indeed in Limerick or in Cork, and as you know well, Mary Lou, from O'Devany Gardens, that pushes up the price of the rental and the purchase properties, and it means even the affordables that may be delivered under Micheál Martin and Leo Varadkar won't actually be affordable to hard-working families on modest and above modest income. So is there enough for renters? No, there isn't. What's going to happen with renters post-COVID-19 restrictions being lifted? No. And crucially, just like the last 4 years where Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael failed renters, there's nothing to stop rent spiralling out of control again once the ban on rent increases is lifted. So I have to say renters will feel sorely done by this deal. All the more reason to keep organised, keep active and keep the pressure on, because there's one thing for sure, renters can't put up with another 4 to 5 years of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael's housing policy.
Absolutely. And obviously small business. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Just for Eoin, that, you know, for a lot of people out there, you know, they think that just rent increases are just happening naturally, or house prices are going up naturally. But there was a very interesting report, and Eoin's familiar with this, the investors report. It was a note that was for international investors investing in property here. And it basically said that the policy of the government suits these international big funds over ordinary renters, house buyers, and indeed what it does is that the government's policies have pushed up rent, have pushed up house prices, and have resulted in bonanza profits for these type of funds. And, you know, from my reading, I'm sure, Eoin, you probably have the same view, is that there's nothing that will scare those investors tonight reading what's in that programme for government, because it seems as if it's same old, same old.
Well, just on that, Pearse, Fianna Fáil made a big play about wanting to close the generous tax breaks that Michael Noonan introduced back in 2013 and 14, which you so strongly criticised. Because these real estate investment trusts who are paying no tax on their rent roll, no capital gains, are stepping in and buying up whole blocks of new built apartments and houses, and then either renting them out at extortionate rents or selling them on at high prices. And it's very interesting because I can't see anything in this draft programme for government that tackles any of that. So when Fianna Fáil were saying they were going to put it up to cuckoo funds and vulture funds, I don't see any of that. This is going to be more of the same real estate investor-led development. Who are going to be the losers? Hard-working families looking to rent, looking to buy, young people looking to get on the property ladder, and of course all of those people who may end up indeed homeless as a result of the failure of Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael's pro-big landlord, pro-big developer housing policy.
They just never seem to learn, huh? Or maybe they just don't want to. You know, it's just an incredible thing after all of the tea and sympathies to a whole generation locked out of home ownership and not even able to afford to make the rent. I mean, after all of that this is what they produce. It's just infuriating. Pearse, Aidan is asking the question. Aidan, you're welcome. And he's raising the issue of small businesses, because obviously the economy was put to sleep, and we are really, really conscious, Aidan, that SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises and micro businesses are the backbone of this economy, of the Irish economy. And bear in mind, that's the case right across the continent. In fact, I imagine that's a global reality. But Aidan is very critical of the support so far that have been put in place to support small business. He actually goes so far to say, Pearse, to say that this is actually an insult to small businesses. So we get your reaction to that. And he also raises one. Here's one that we were talking to the banks about, Pearse, the issue of the mortgage payment holidays for 3 months. As all of you know, that's now been extended out to 6 months. But the scandalous situation where you're still paying interest, you're paying interest on the double. And Pearse, as you know, has been working hard on these issues. And we as a party have been challenging the financial institutions really, really strongly on this point.
Yeah, Mary Lou, and Aidan's absolutely right. It is an insult what's happening to small, medium enterprises right across the state, because as no fault of their own, and for the right reasons, the economy was put to sleep. But as you put somebody to sleep, as you put the economy to sleep, you need to make sure that it survives. You need to support it during that period. Bills continue to come in. There's demands that have to be met, and basically, this government here in this state is so far behind the curve in relation to what is happening in other jurisdictions right across Europe. We are not providing the type of support that is needed for businesses. What's been announced so far is pitiful. It's like 3 months rate waiver, whereas up the road in the north, it's a year for affected sectors. Here, the type of grants that were announced, and that was after quite a bit of shouting from ourselves and from the industry to argue and to win the argument that they needed grant support. But it's as low as €2,000, going up to the maximum of €10,000, where what we've been arguing for is that for affected sectors, it needs to be €25,000, just like it is again in the north, and it is in Germany and France and elsewhere. So it's not simply there at all where it needs to be. In terms of interest-free loans, they don't exist here in the state, despite the fact that the state can borrow at negative interest rates. What the state is offering here is loans at 4.5% interest. It doesn't make any sense for businesses that's the type of support that you would be offering. When you look at what's happened in Britain, and we're not using Britain as the shining example, but it's what's happened in Britain and elsewhere. The type of loans that have been offered in Britain is 0%, no repayments for the first 12 months, which is what Sinn Féin are arguing, and then a marginal interest rate afterwards at 2.5%. There's been €20 billion of loans drawn down by the SMEs in Britain as a result of those good conditions. Whereas here in this state, it's €80 million. It's a tiny fraction of that. And unfortunately, unless we get our act together, unless the government get their act together in relation to supports for SMEs, then these SMEs are going to go to the wall. And that can't be allowed to happen. So we're going to continue to argue in relation to what is needed. Part of that is also the suite of insurance reforms that we have that is crippling business also, and we know that many business people now have lodged cases with their interruption insurance. The industry isn't paying out. There's a number of cases that are going before the court. What really bugs me and what frustrates me is I have a piece of legislation that I sponsored on behalf of Sinn Féin. It's been in the making for 3 years. It was introduced 3 years ago. It's passed now unanimously, both houses of the Oireachtas, the Dáil and the Seanad, signed into law by the President, Michael D. Higgins, on the 26th of December. That piece of legislation would actually benefit all businesses out there in relation to the COVID crisis and business interruption, because it clears up any ambiguity in terms of the contract. It says that it has to favour the business and not the industry. But what's happened? Paschal Donoghue did a series of secret meetings with the insurance industry. The industry told him they didn't want this legislation because we all know it provides greater consumer protection for ordinary people and businesses. And therefore, 6 months later, Paschal Donoghue refuses to implement a legislation that's been passed by the Oireachtas, signed into law by the President. And that just gives you an example of where this government, past and present, focus lies in relation to supporting small SMEs or supporting big industry. And the same thing, Mary Lou, can be said about the issue of the mortgage interest, where the banks are kind of saying, give me a pat on the back. We're allowing people to defer their payments for 3 months originally and now 6 months. And aren't we so good? But what they didn't tell you is that they're going to profit off all of this, because interest will still accrue, and interest then will be rolled into the capital, and interest will be applied in that. So people are out thousands of euro as a result of this, will have to pay. And these are big banks that are preying on the hardship of small businesses and of homeowners who can't pay their mortgages at this point in time. And if you didn't know any better, you would think that's the way it just has to be. But that isn't the case. That isn't the case. Right across Europe, in places like Belgium and Spain and many other European jurisdictions, the governments have legislated to make it illegal for the banks to charge interest during this deferral period. So this week, we're going to launch a policy document. As part of that will be the heads of a piece of legislation that will also outlaw the charging of interest during this period, which would support not only businesses but also homeowners. But that's what a government for change would be doing, should be doing, and that's what Sinn Féin will be doing this week.
And it's certainly an issue that we've raised with the banks, with the financial institutions, and we're on it, and we'll keep at that. Brenda, you're asking about the increase. Are we going to see an increase in the retirement age? Now, that's a very straightforward question. And let me tell you, amongst the pages and pages and reams of rhetoric in the document, we think that there will be a pause. There isn't going to be an immediate increase, but the thing is going to get kicked into a commission. So who knows where they are planning to bring this. They flip-flopped on the issue, Brenda, and I don't think for a second the political establishment understood or even still understands the fact that 65 is the appropriate age in a modern civilized society in which you should have the option, not to be forced, but to have the option to retire with your pension. That's our position, and we will continue. We'll continue to work on that. Emily is asking about childcare. Are the childcare proposals in the deal what you would have wanted to see? The answer to that is, I think we can all say, absolutely not. I mean, we had set out, Emily, a very ambitious childcare strategy. Like, we've committed ourselves that this decade is a decade for big, ambitious planning and successes in Irish society and in the Irish economy. And we have set out a staged process by which childcare would become a proper public service, funded in the same way as, say, primary school education, with different patrons, but with the model that would ensure that children and infants can have access to really quality early childhood education, that workers in the sector have decent terms and conditions of employment, not the kind of on and off precarious low paid situation they find themselves in now, and critically childcare the parents can afford. You know, as we speak, it is still the case that childcare is a second mortgage in many, many homes. So we had we dedicated a substantial piece of our manifesto to that. So I can say on our behalf, we are very underwhelmed by the childcare piece in this document. And can I also say it comes on the back of absolutely disastrous mishandling of childcare provision in the course of this pandemic, you know, for frontline workers and for everybody else. So, Emily, there's a lot of work to be done there. It's a sector and a service that needs a lot of attention. Kathleen is asking about Irish unity, asking the question, if this government prevails, how does this affect unity talks in the North? And then Sam, hello Sam, is asking, is there a plan for reuniting our island in the deal? Well, I think we can say there's no plan for reunification in this deal. And in fact, there's only a reference to a unit that will be established. I mean, that's a welcome thing, but it's certainly nothing as ambitious as it. And do you know the unfortunate thing here is that it's in circumstances where there is a huge opportunity to really reshape Ireland. It just seems that the three parties just look past that opportunity, or didn't see the relevance of it, or just aren't interested in building on the very considerable progress that's been made to date. Eoin, what was your take on that bit of it?
Yeah, and I suppose it's typical of the lack of vision in the overall document. I mean, if you look at the kind of optimism that was at the public meetings that we were doing immediately after the election, the ones we did in Dublin and Monaghan and in Cork, there was a huge that things could really change, not just social and economic change, but political and constitutional. And we did that enormous meeting up in Newry as well. I think Pearse and I got stuck in a traffic jam on the way and only arrived at the end of the meeting.
You got caught behind a tractor, as I recall, that broke down.
There was a very serious accident, in fact. But what struck me was the scale of the hope, the scale of the sense that for the first time in a long time, really profound, far-reaching change could take place. And I suppose what we need to say to people tonight is, notwithstanding the disappointment that will be there at seeing the cutting short of that change, a comment you made today at our doorstep in Leinster House really struck with me, that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, Leo Varadkar and Micheál Martin may be able to delay that change, but they absolutely won't be able to stop it. So while some of the commentary we're making today is obviously quite critical of this document, nobody should be walking away forlorn or I suppose with their head down. We need to maximise the degree of change that people feel can be delivered, because no matter what, it is going to be delivered. Why? Because people want it, because people need it, and most importantly, because people deserve it. So, notwithstanding the fact that there's a lack of any commitment towards Irish unification and all of the advantages that would bring politically, economically, socially, we need to rekindle that spirit that I think was in those meeting rooms in Dublin and in Cork and in Newry and elsewhere, so that whatever happens in the coming weeks with the membership of Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and the Green Party, that movement for change, that unstoppable movement, gets back up and running, so people get the change that they rightly deserve.
I think, Mary, I think Eoin's got it there. It is unstoppable. There was a conversation after the election where a woman came up to me and told me just her own experience of what she was thinking. She said she went out and she cast her vote for Sinn Féin hoping for change. She says what she didn't think was happening, but what blew her away was the fact that so many hundreds of the exact same thing for her. So no longer does she hope for change, but now she believes that change is possible. And I think that you can't turn that off. I think that, that Rubicon has crossed. It's in so many people's head that they hope for something. Now they know that it is possible. And while Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are clubbing together to prevent that, it's only a matter of time before the damn bus and change is delivered.
So and on that score, lads, a lot of comments and questions just about what happens next. A lot of disappointment being expressed, anger, deeply disappointed that the Greens are now going to prop up the FF party. That's Maureen. Lewin asking, how do we challenge this agreement if it's passed by the membership? Roisin similarly asking, is this a done deal? And that sense of disappointment is natural, but we really need to really deeply understand that something very significant has happened here, and I think we've been saying consistently to people that we are very conscious as the Sinn Féin leadership that the appetite for change is about Sinn Féin, yes, but it's also about something much bigger than us. It's not just about Sinn Féin. It's about a particular moment, I think, in Irish life and Irish society, where people actually across generations have decided and settled on the view that a new government, a new form of government, a new politics is truly in the full national interest. And people are prepared to come out and vote for that, prepared to back us, to lead that change, but to develop it with others. And I suppose to Maureen, to Lewin, to Roisin, the big challenge now for all of us is not to be deflected, not to be defeated, not to be down, but to actually grasp the significance of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael against their instincts being forced into government with each other. That's really what's happened here. So great is their urge to keep us out, and so significant was the mandate for change and for Sinn Féin that actually the old two were left with no option. They are each other's life raft to try and keep the status quo going. But I agree with you, Pearse and Eoin. I think the jig is up. I think, to use another cliche when I'm on a roll, the genie is out of the bottle. And I think people can now just see, just nearly grasp what's possible. So we need to get on with it. So Fee voted for Sinn Féin the first time, desperately wanted to see us in government, wanted to see Mary Louise Taoiseach, very discouraged now by Fine Gael Fianna Fáil agreement, don't trust them, and she could use a bit of hope tonight. Well, Fee, I hope that we can give you hope and that you return that hope in turn to us, because the truth is that we're all in this together. And I can tell you, we're not for giving up. We're not for putting our heads down or to have any sense that that we are in any way defeated or diminished. Some people might think that because Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and the Greens have managed to cobble this deal together, that's the end of the story, that the story over. But that's not true. The real truth is that our story of change is really only just beginning. And the opportunities that are there for us as a country, as a people, are immense. They cannot be overstated, but they're going to have to be worked for. And we're going to have to stand our ground, quite frankly. We're not going to blink. If it is the thing that we are in opposition, this incoming government will face an opposition like no other. It's our job to be the most effective, most progressive opposition that this state has ever seen. It's our job as the government in waiting, because that is how we see these matters. This is the government in change in waiting. It's our job to champion the change that you voted for, all of the things that you voted for, the houses, the decent healthcare, the pension age, a decent chance for your children, a decent life, a decent environment, all of the things that citizens rightly aspire to. They're not grandiose, they're the basics. It's about getting the basics right. And of course, full democracy on a reunified Ireland. We're not giving up on any of that. And it's our job to lead the change. But we need all of you to be with us. So I hope, because I am very hopeful. Pearse is hopeful. Eoin is hopeful. Our whole team are. And we said at the beginning, yes, we're disappointed. Are we hugely surprised that the establishment reacted this way? Not really, because we've never imagined that setting out to change Ireland was ever going to be an easy or a straightforward task. But you know what? The important things are worth struggling for. They're worth working for. And we need to stick together in this. So Fee and everyone else, Maureen, Luan, Roisin, and everyone who's joined us here this evening, we're talking to you at a moment of hope and opportunity. And we are determined that we are going to win. Ireland will win. Change will win. This is our moment. These are our times. And we're so glad to walk this road with all of you. Stay with us and stay with change. So thanks for tuning in. Gur Míle Maithugh Gael from myself, from Eoin O'Brien, from Pearse Doherty, from all of the Sinn Féin team, and the hundreds of thousands of you who vote for us, support us, those who want change. Good for you. Keep the faith, and good night.